Howdy ho, friends and foes, and welcome to Dads on Life, your weekly episodic show about parenting from a male perspective. I'm your host, Jay Miles, and with me, as always, are my co-host, Keith Bogan.
Good morning, sir.
Doug Hammerdike.
Present as always.
And Chad Holloway.
Happy Sunday.
Today, we kind of were spitballing on ideas what we were going to do, and Doug literally at we could call the 11th hour, about 2.5 minutes ago, came up with an idea of, Doug, why don't you describe it? I think this is going to be interesting.
All right. It's one of those things that your parents could, anybody could tell you these wives' tales, and a lot of times they might have some truth to them. They may not. A lot of them probably don't. And sometimes we grow up believing them only because they've come from your parents. And one of the ones, just to get us started, that came to my mind is my mom, say kind of like the idea of don't go out in the rain, because you'll catch a cold. And just the whole idea of, that the rain could actually give you a cold, when we all understand that when we break it down, you catch colds by germs, not by the rain, whether the rain is cold or not, or if it's a sometimes shower, which, I would have to say that we've been encouraged to go out in a summer shower. But when it's cold out and, and you're just soaked to the bone, the idea that you could more likely to catch it, that you could catch a cold by being out in the cold rain is just like one of those things that I'm sure everybody here has heard before. So I just wanted to base some conversations and hear some other stories about things that your parents might have told you that you would have believed in. I would have to say that I kind of would have, like I said, I know the science behind catching a cold, but I would have to say I kind of believed that until I was a little bit older. And one of my friends, Janine, gave me an article that says, you can't actually catch a cold by being, and I was like, I know that in my head, but I still believe that in my heart that, there was a connection there.
You can't really catch anything except hypothermia or allergies from the weather. Technically, there's only, and that's a trigger. It's not anything else. But yeah, one of my I think we all were told by our parents, don't go swimming for 45 minutes, half an hour after you eat. It was because they didn't want to watch us. It wasn't because you were going to get cramps or anything. They didn't want to watch us. They wanted to finish eating their stuff too. That's what it usually ended up being. They just didn't want to watch us at the point. But I mean, we've all done, and we all disobeyed that law and rule, and pretty much figured out pretty quick it was BS. I mean, this is going to be. That's why I said this is going to be interesting. Trying to think though, but the pool one was the waiting before you go swimming after eating was always a big one.
I don't understand, Jason, but you still believe in the Easter Bunny. So what are we talking about here? I mean,
Well, that's true.
Well, in this year, you say that in this year, we now everybody in this house knows that Santa Claus is not real and all that's and the Easter Bunny we got through, and the Tooth Fairy we got through all three in actually like 2 days time or a day and a half of time that we got through all of them, and there was no catastrophic anything. It was just
broken hearts all over the Miles household.
What's that?
There's broken hearts all over your house.
Now, Jason, how did that go down? Was it an older kid telling them, or what happened?
It was Elise and Delana. It was triggered by Elise, actually. And it went over okay. I got a phone call about it a few minutes later with all of them in the car, it started with a text message, then it was a phone call, and everything was fine.
They're gonna be harboring resentment that whoever tells them that those characters are not real, there's always harbored resentment against. So at least 5 years from now, someone's going to smack your wife. Get up and smack her.
They smack her now.
Okay. I don't want to hear about that part of your life. It's okay, but that's fine. Each to their own.
I would agree with that, Keith, because I still hate Troy Connell from telling me there's no Santa Claus.
Delana actually, I think, figured it out on her own. Pretty
Which
much. if I
means
remember
somebody,
correctly.
well, hold on, it means somebody at school or some character in a show must have said it, because somebody has to always put the thought in the head of a kid.
She never really said that anything, anybody told her. All right. It was not even I think she kind of just figured it out. Now, the interesting thing is still going to bring out the elf, and now we're going to see what happens. Maybe they hide it from each other. I don't know. Something interesting will come out of that, or they hide it and we try to find it. I don't know. But I will say one thing about the elf is it's been very inconvenient at times, because somehow it ends up usually on either the stove or on the handle of the oven, and you know what you're not supposed to do. So,
Mm.
and
I'm
was
gonna,
just gonna
just
say,
look at him, you're like, you're not supposed to move it, and you're not supposed to touch what's around it. So you can't use the stove if the elf is on the stove, or you can't use the oven if the elf is hanging on the handle of the oven.
Well, what I was going to say is some of the stuff I even though we've got these stories concocted about, the Easter Bunny coming and bringing these things, or Santa Claus bringing presents, even though, obviously Frankie doesn't believe in Santa Claus, I still am like a big believer in the spirit of Christmas, and like tried when he found out about it, I tried to convey to him that it's really kind of a feeling, and like, the idea of Santa Claus is like that somebody who wants to give gifts to you, and I myself, I personally prefer the Santa Claus role. I like to give much more than receive around the holidays. So for me, it's not a Santa Claus, but there's a Santa Claus like feeling that I like to try to promote, and that I also enjoy.
Meanwhile, don't you have a 5-year-old with an earshot?
No, not a 5-year-old. I've got an 11-year-old,
Oh,
and she's pretty advanced. She's pretty advanced, I'll say, from living in Colombia, and they're pretty ruthless down there. So I don't think she's believed in that stuff for a long time.
Delana figured it out probably, or whatever. That happened around when she was like Sadie, maybe maybe even younger than Sadie's age. Might have been 7 when that all went down, pretty much. So
yeah. But the rule I have is that, Mike, if you talk about Santa Claus not existing, you don't get any presents.
Oh, that's harsh.
Heartless bastard.
I'm an asshole, man.
Okay, Keith, I'm sure being raised by because Elise's mother, Jesus Christ, Elise's mother and father, we've heard them, and her grandfather, her grandfather was just passed away last year. We heard them, still we're hearing them recently, like kind of jokingly. I'm sure there's a few doozies from your parents.
Well, I'm about to take us down a very, very different path that's going to put a dark cloud, I think, over the proceedings here. So when I was growing up, none of us were allowed. Sorry, my cat's asking to be pet. None of us were allowed to participate in sports. Whatever youth sports leagues were present. We each, well, I wouldn't say each of us. I don't think David asked for much of that. He wasn't very athletic, very short in stature. And I don't think Stuart was ever interested, but my brother Joel, my oldest brother, and I were very much, I want to play. And we were always told no. This is more of the theory out of my brother Joel, because he had more of the global view of everything, being the oldest brother than any of us. And he also was saw a lot more of my younger parents, if you will. This is Joel's theory of hiding in plain sight. As we've talked about before, my father in particular was born in Germany and fled from Germany at a very early single-digit age, just ahead of Hitler. And Joel's theory is that it wasn't just Hitler who was anti-Semitic, but the world in general. And when my father and his brother, his mother and father and cousin, the only survivors, the only ones who didn't die in the concentration camps, made it to Brazil, they learned a lifestyle of hiding in plain sight. They never talked about being Jewish. They never practiced Judaism. They basically blended into the background without literally hiding in a box, but they learned that it was dangerous in those days to admit you were Jewish, especially because a lot of the Nazis had fled to Brazil as well after the war. So what we came to, we've bantered about this a lot over the years. The reason my parents would say, "Oh, sports are dangerous. You're going to get hurt. You're going to get hurt." The reality was they didn't want us doing anything that people would see, that people would notice. They were trying to hide us in plain sight simply by restricting what we could do extracurricular wise. We would be sent to school. We would, do our studies, but we didn't really participate in anything else. You're looking at the first board of the chess team. That was my foray into extracurricular activities as a child. I played baseball one year. I finally convinced them after just screaming my head off. I finally let me play baseball when I was 12 years old. But of course, I'd never touched anything. I had never done anything, so I was terrible. It would wind up not being until I was 24 that I would play any organized sports. But the wives' tale, if you will, the excuse was always, "Oh, it's too dangerous. Oh, you'll get hurt. No, we don't want people getting hurt." But there was a very sinister reality behind all of that. I told you I was going to take you down a much different trail here with this. And so when Doug started talking about things that our parents told us that were not quite true, that was the first thing that popped into my mind. And it sort of, Joel's theory certainly has a lot of credence. My parents aren't here to ask them about that, but it certainly makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of other things not connected to this conversation that would suggest that they were hiding all the time, without technically hiding.
Now,
So yeah, parents can tell you a lot of very interesting things to guide you down a path that they want you to go down. And as that relates to my own kids, it really speaks to a lot of why our kids did what they've done, which is the exact opposite. We thrust them into the spotlight. We put them on every sports team. We got them, both of them ran for student council, gave speeches in front of people, and we're very public about the fact that we're Jewish. We're not even very religious, but we're very public about the fact that we're Jewish. Both boys were bar mitzvahed, and they had big parties and all that stuff. So we did exactly the opposite, and I think, and that was inspired more by their mother than by me. But there's a lot of things I did that were very different and very opposite of the way my father in particular raised us, and that allowing them to show their religious background is definitely one of them.
Now, I find that interesting because haven't you said that your father and mother used to have parties that had politicians at them, local politicians?
Dad was the head of the I'm sorry, Chad, one of the political parties locally in Homedale, where I grew up.
We can all make the assumption which one.
And he was very influential in statewide politics, but he never ran for office. And in fact, he would always avoid the photographers, and he didn't want his picture in the newspaper. He would he wanted to run things from behind the scenes. He never wanted the credit for anything. He wanted it to be given to the candidates. And you picked up on the same theme. He definitely was hiding in plain view. I think it was more that he felt it was the way to get candidates elected was to make sure they were in the spotlight and they were given the credit. But there could have very easily been an element of he was also hiding. Well, constantly he was asked to run for office, and he said no every year.
Well, there are on both sides, and we all can attest to this. There are people who do that. There are people who that's their thing. They're the, for lack of a better word, pimps for politicians, where they just do, they put the candidate out there. And one of the famous ones here in New Jersey, when I mentioned the name Dennis Norcross, Dennis Norcross is one of the political leaders of the state of New Jersey for the left, the Democratic Party. Dennis has never
Progressive
run.
people, yes.
Dennis has never run for office himself. Dennis is always the one who's pumping up, especially in Southern Jersey, the one who's pumping the candidates out there. Dennis doesn't run himself or anything. But when it comes to power in this state, Dennis Norcross is probably at the top of the list, high up on the list in New Jersey when it comes to power positions. But he's never run for office. So that'll tell you how you can ascend in the ranks politically or in any kind of situation and have pull, but never take the position yourself. So they're kind of unelected, elected positions in a way.
Right. I mean, you certainly can't have the influence unless people follow you.
Right.
So, you're being elected by a silent vote, if you will. And my father was very good at getting that vote for sure. I mean, and yeah, when he would have these giant parties at the house, it was all of that particular political persuasion. But it was all of the people who followed him and all the people who supported him and all the people who did things that he would direct the party to do. And all the candidates too. These 100-person political mixers in our own basement. It's pretty crazy. Yep, that's how I got drunk the first time, but we're not going to go down that road. That's a different show. But
oh boy. Yeah, we don't need to go down that.
Yeah, no. But he would still do things that were public. Like he was the president of the school PTA for a while. Don't know how that fit in, but he was.
Really?
Yeah.
Very surprising. A male president of the PTA.
And my mother was the
Every day?
secretary. And my mother served as the PTA secretary at the same time. So we had half the power structure of the school of that group. That was pretty funny. I don't have any memory of it. I just know it happened. That happened when I was probably in kindergarten or first grade or something like that. But sometimes your parents will tell you ridiculous things because that they were probably told the same thing. Don't go out in the rain, kind of thing. Since the beginning of time, everybody said that. In fact, my own then wife used to say that to our boys, and I used to laugh at her when she was saying it. But she would never let the boys go out in the rain. And to that extent, now when there's a big storm, like a heavy rainstorm or a blizzard going on, Justin and I like to go out and throw a baseball. In the middle of that, the neighbors will look at us like we're completely off our rockers. It'll be 10 degrees, 4 feet of snow out there, whatever, and we'll be throwing a baseball. It'll be torrential downpour, and we'll be out there throwing a baseball. And I don't know if I necessarily do that because I'm level setting from my childhood, but Justin just went right into it. He loves that stuff. It's just we become well known in the neighborhood for crazy stuff like that.
No, just face it. You're doing it to piss off your ex-wife.
Well, I'm trying to remember if she ever cared about that sort of thing. There are certain things about that part of my life that I've blanked out. So, I don't know.
There's a surprise.
I'll ask Justin about that when he wakes up.
In other news, water's wet.
Yes.
I was thinking of another one. Measure twice, cut once. Oh, wait a minute. No, never mind. That's for real. So it's like one of the things that you never learned from your parents as well, I guess also applies. Because
that is real.
Home ownership is one of those things where your parents probably filled you with a lot of like one-liners that would be helpful in your future, but somehow we didn't pick up on it always. And once you get there, you're like, oh yeah, that molding looks like that because I didn't follow the rules.
Yeah, we chalked shit up to useless information. They knew exactly what the hell they were talking about. Yeah, yeah, you can say that
Well,
one.
the other one I think that's true also is idle hands do the work of the devil. It's like, especially for kids, right? Like I'm always like, well, you got to keep them involved in other things, like to so that if they're left to their own resources and some of the friends, they're going to have a certain friend group and they could engage in other things. Because I know all of our kids are active, and I think that helps to keep them out of trouble. And I know for me, that totally it literally changed my life in 6th grade. Like once I became involved in sports and wasn't just hanging out, because when I hung out, like it was kind of a shady group.
Yes, we've heard some of your stories there, Chad. You got involved in some shady dealings. Yes, we know.
I think I have my own knowledge of shady groups. Kind of led me down a certain path, don't you think?
And wait, and Doug certainly does, because now he's on town council, so he's got some shady groups there too. That's for sure.
Yeah, we all know what they say about friends in low places. So now, I mean, one interesting thing that we can sit here and talk about for a second is preventative maintenance, things like that. There's things I'm sure we've been told by people in our lives that we should do it, we shouldn't do it, but we kind of end up doing it just because. I mean, one of the interesting ones is, the one we all know is, if your friend, jumps off a bridge, you can follow them. We both remember that one.
Yeah. Except we did.
What's that?
Yeah.
Except that we did.
Well,
In Lawrence Harbor there, that
being where you're from and knowing the bridges, I think everybody a lot of people in town jumped off those bridges. So
Yeah, and I was going to say he did, and so did I. He jumped off, and so did I. We have a river growing up near our house, and there was a bridge. It was better than a diving board.
Yeah, Jason knows the bridge I'm talking about, crossing over 35 there in Lawrence Harbor.
Yep.
And we also learned about the swiftness of the water there. So that was another interesting thing. So
sounds like you're lucky to be alive.
That's what my parents would say.
There you go.
And being where that is and where the bay and all that stuff is and all that, I wouldn't go anywhere near that water now.
Oh, well, yeah, well, of course. Well, I mean, even 30 years ago, it still was,
You're downstream of the Raritan River.
Yeah.
Which goes through Sayreville, Perth Amboy, Woodbridge. Yeah. Through those refineries and all that.
Yeah.
You couldn't pay me enough.
But yeah.
Which is funny because they did a salmon release up there about 15 years ago.
Oh God, did I eat some of that salmon? Oh, geez.
No one knows where they went. They disappeared.
I guess when you're talking about maintenance and all, the first thing that came to my mind is your 3,000-mile oil change. Is probably the only one that follows that is probably Keith.
Actually, I never did. And by the way, this is how ignorant I am about cars. I fought against synthetic oil for a long time because, well, my God, it's like $90 for a freaking oil change. Are you kidding me? What? It never occurred to me that it might last longer. So I finally, now that I have 2 cars, including the one that Justin drives, that both take synthetic oil, and I don't have a choice. I finally had to look at it and study it and say, wait a minute, I'm not getting screwed
3,000
here.
miles.
Yeah, it's literally almost the same price, depending on how you handle it. It could even be slightly cheaper. But it never occurred to me to look at it. So I was like, I don't want that. I don't want that. And now I'm fine with it. Now I don't have to go for, they're very comfortable saying 10,000 miles.
7,500 to 10,000. Yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've read some that say 7,500 to 15,000. I'm not going to go that far. I'm going to go about 10.
Yeah,
I mean,
I get a thing that tells me to go.
I just figured that with Keith, with keeping his car so long, that he must have been a strict on something that, you know.
I was pretty good at about 4,000, 4,500, 5,000. I never really went past. That's not true. There were times when I went past 5,000, but most of the time I was around 4,500 to 5,000. Yeah, I was pretty religious about that stuff.
Yeah, but I'm gonna call him out on the fact that he's full of shit too. He did replace the engine and transmission in that car.
But the engine never went bad. I only replaced the engine because there was another one sitting there that was cheap.
I'm just saying, but he did replace the engine and transmission in that car. Transmissions go. You almost every car you're gonna end up replacing could very easily end up replacing a transmission. The engine, you shouldn't have to replace. But
now that I think about it, I wonder if I made a mistake by replacing the engine because maybe the younger one went faster. Who knows?
No.
The younger one only actually lasted about a little over 200,000.
A little over 200. This fucking guy.
No, the original one lasted 461,000.
Okay, Al Bundy.
That's amazing.
Hey, those cars are going to go forever, man. Yeah, did I tell you, by the way, I'm 6 weeks into my new car and I've got 10,000 miles on it already. That's it. I mean, at $4.95 a gallon, I'm staying home. I can't do this anymore. But I do get a lot better mileage now than I did before.
Obviously. This fucking guy.
So Chad, when did you start teaching Frankie about cars?
He was pretty young because I'm a big believer in starting them before it even gets there. I think we've talked about, like with talking about like changes in his body, kind of the sex ed type of stuff. I started him very young, but age appropriate stuff, kind of brought him up. And like, even when he would just like sit in the car with me, I'd talk about things like you need to change the oil. Now, if he does that, I'm going to be very surprised. I'm hoping he does, but at least he has the knowledge, but it's up to him to do it at this point. Right. But I remember him being very young and we would talk and I'd try to explain the way a car operates just so things would make sense. So like, some people out there think if you got a flat tire, your car's not going to start, right? It's different systems. So try to explain some of that, how things operate. There's the motor, there's electric, there's the drivetrain and those kinds of things. So, but yeah, he's not, well, I would say in general, I'd say he's kind of like many of his peers. He doesn't have the capacity to change his own oil. I mean, that growing up, I changed my own oil and did all that stuff. And we had the ramps at the house. And so, I'm 16 years old, putting my car up on the ramps, climbing under it and doing things, changing the brakes on it and those kinds of things.
You can change brakes? Come on over to my house, will you?
I
retired
from that many years ago. Once I got a few bucks and I could pay somebody else to do it, no.
Or now you get a new car and they give you free oil changes for life, so you don't even have to do that crap at all.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Exactly. So. But, I think it's just a whole different generation. Again, we had to care for our cars growing up. I know in my household we did anyway. And even my stepdad, even when he was older, he would change his own oil and do all the stuff to his car. And but I just didn't have the time or wherewithal necessarily to do that later once I got to a certain age. Like once I got to college, then I just didn't have all the tools there.
I remember as a kid and my grandfather, I had a bomb of a car that didn't want to start like half the time. So he would be like, "Oh, just drive around with a can of gasoline in your car and pour a little bit in the carburetor, and the car would start right up." And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Sure, not a problem." So I remember I was delivering pizza, and delivering pizza, you need a reliable car. My car was not that car, you know. So I got frustrated, went out on the other side of Old Bridge it was actually a little bit farther down to Idlewild by Matawan, and a nicer area. And the car wouldn't start, so I get out there with my little can and off of 34. So I got out there with my little can of gas, and I pour a little gas in the carburetor. The thing caught on fire, a little spark, and that was it. So I had to run to the guy's house who I was delivering pizza to, and get his hose and like hose down the engine because it's like on fire. It was topical because of the gasoline, but I mean, it was something else. Could you imagine somebody delivers your pizza and then he has a car fire in front of your house?
Well, at least the pizza will be warm.
Yeah.
Yeah, my kids, well, Justin at least knows enough to see a warning light go on and like, okay, I'll open the book and see what is wrong, and then I can tell the shop what to do, what the problem is. He wouldn't touch the car. Jeremy probably would ignore the warning lights and just keep driving. He's not going to do anything at all. Thank God he doesn't have a car yet. I mean, seriously.
But the cool
Well,
thing about our parents was actually thinking about the problems and knowing how to generally fix a lot of them. I mean,
Mhm.
nowadays it's like we don't even try. Like, and sometimes the mechanics don't even help. We have a situation right now in our headlights, like the headlight keeps blowing out. And we went to the mechanic, and we're like, "Hey, headlights blew out. Can you replace it?" "Yeah, sure." And it was cheap, so it was like no big deal. We need inspection, all that, so we wrapped it all together into one big price. We come back, and like a day later, the light bulb burns out. We tell them, "Hey, the light bulb's out again. Did you give me a faulty one, or what the heck's going on?" And not thinking about it like it was electronic system on it. And he was like, "Oh yeah, well now we got to replace the whole entire thing. It's $1,000. It all has to be reprogrammed. It takes hours to do that." Asked a couple other people, and they're like, "Yeah, he's telling you the truth." I'm like, "You got to be kidding me!" Or a stupid headlight. You got to do all that.
Because
And
everything's got a computer.
yeah,
Everything in the car has a computer now. Yep.
yeah. But
And
we
now
have,
you understand why I miss my old car.
but
Didn't have any
manually,
of that shit.
you could turn on and off the headlights. Like there's still a switch that you could do that. And guess what? The headlights turn on if you just use the manual switch, which the mechanic did not say. He just wanted his $1,000.
So wait. To run an auto, it doesn't work.
Right. It blows
But
out
if
the
you
bulb.
turn it on normally, like a normal human being.
Yeah, with your
Work.
hand. Yeah. I have a mechanic friend who said it is possible, and I also
Oh, sure, it's possible. Dumb,
I-
but possible.
I checked with two other mechanics, and yeah, they agree that it is the automatic lights. That is the real situation with it, and yeah, and that they were like, well, if that works, then manually turn it on, then manually turn it on. But nobody, like, we were just like, oh my god, and then I was like, well, why don't we just try it with our hand, and and yeah, it works. So I won't be spending the $1,000. We will just have to turn the things on by hand.
Well, I've got two stories related to that. One is that an ex had a BMW, and there was a problem with her battery. So I opened it up in the hood thinking, oh yeah, I used to do my own stuff on my cars 30 years ago. So I'll be able to figure this out. So I couldn't find the battery under the hood. So I had to get out. So I got out the owner's manual finally. The battery's in the trunk.
Oh,
So
wow.
I had to go back, and it doesn't even look like a normal battery. It was like shaped different and everything. So I'm like, okay, well, I just got to change this out of here. So I disconnected it, and then I couldn't find another battery for it. And then because I had disconnected the battery, that had disconnected everything, and only a licensed dealer could like reset it. So then went from like trying to change out the battery, speaking about all this computerized stuff, I went from changing out the battery to now I had to have it towed from my house to a dealer where they can change out the battery and reset everything, and then we can go pick it up. I mean, it was just a big pain.
Well, now I know why she divorced you. Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm like, I was sitting there just like looking, where's that damn battery? Where's the battery up here? But those things they're engineered, a lot of these cars now are engineered so well. Like if you open up a 1960 something, there's a lot of space in there around the engine, and you can work, right? And you can identify things. But now everything is literally packed in there for like economy of size, and they make use of every centimeter that's inside that engine compartment.
Yeah, what they're really doing is making it impossible for the owner of the car to do any of their own work, so you have to go back to them.
Well,
Yeah, we can be part of it.
We went out to dinner last night, and nice car, real nice car, next to me, because I had taken Sadie to a birthday party in two separate cars. And I look over, and he goes to get in the car, and the wife opens the hood of the car and puts their leftovers in the front of it. And she closes the hood, and I went to go. I was like, oh wow! I was like, I thought it was a Ferrari or Lamborghini, it was a Corvette. I was like, wait a minute, when the hell they put the engine in the back? Corvettes. I'm like, really? Yeah, I'm like, holy crap! It was a nice Corvette, but that's another one that always confounded me, of cars with engines in the back of them. And now they're doing it in American cars. I'm like, oh, great.
I was also thinking, like, I guess the other thing is when our parents don't obey the rules, and the one that comes to my mind is not holding Roman candles. Like, you're supposed to put them in the ground, but
Yep.
How many parents have shot them off by handing them to you?
Well, wait, there was a movie from a long time, from probably early 90s. It was speaking of Al Bundy, Ed O'Neill. Not Ed O'Neill. Ed O'Neill? Ed O'Neill.
Yeah.
He plays a stepfather type character where he's bringing his girlfriend's son home. I forgot what the name of the movie is, but there's a scene where he's shooting off fireworks, and he's actually got the Roman candles. He puts it on his head. I'm like, oh my God, like to see that now. Meanwhile,
So what you're saying is he's played the same character in every single thing he's ever done.
Yeah, pretty much. Now my girls now are freaked out by them. They really won't even watch them. They don't want to watch them. Delana had a little bit of an issue. And again, it was 1 o'clock in the morning when the neighbor was lighting them off too on 4th of July. But that's another story. She had an issue, so there'll be no holding Roman candles anywhere near this house. So, but yeah, I could tell you some doozy of stories with fireworks and my dad. My dad used to have a depot in Brooklyn. I think he was getting them in New York. I don't think he was getting them in Pennsylvania, but he used to put on display that you wouldn't believe. And he actually did it a couple of years ago too. But this was, you could buy them in Pennsylvania then. So he puts on the hell of a display usually when he does it. He hasn't done it in a while, but I remember some 4th of July's, or New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve was another one that my father loved lighting fireworks off for. I actually remember one New Year's Eve, us walking around with no jackets. It was 70 degrees, and there's my father lighting off fireworks in the backyard. That's yeah.
Fun times. And let me add another variable to that. shooting them out of a moving car.
I got
So, so we
Yeah.
had, so we
Yeah.
had bottle rockets, and if you toss a bottle rocket at the right time, it'll go away from you. If you toss it the wrong time, it comes back at you, right? So my buddy's got a brand new, like a Cutlass. I don't know if you guys remember this, kind of in the early 80s when the Cutlasses were super nice. It was kind of a great car to have. But he was a young guy, just bought this brand new car, and I'm his passenger. So that's the first mistake he made with that. And we're driving by this girl's house, and I said, slow down, I'm going to toss this bottle rocket over here at her house. So I go to toss the bottle rocket, and he goes right up, and then it turns around and comes right back in his car. And so we had to pull over and let all the smoke clear out of it. And it smelled like sulfur, like for, I don't know, days after that. He had to air it out all the time. I felt so bad, but that was the worst that I did in the car. But that was the one I did related to fireworks. Lots of fun.
Wow. Something my parents told me as a child made me absolutely terrified of fireworks. I don't know what it was. I don't have any memory at all of it, but from the time I was very little, I was petrified of them. In fact, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I couldn't watch fireworks unless I was inside the car, protected from the fireworks. And it took me years to get comfortable with that sort of thing. Yeah, in the realm of wives' tales and such like that, like Doug's talking about, I am sure they told me something that was so horrifying that it was well over the top of was reasonable, just to make sure I stayed away from that sort of thing. And of course, I'm sure they foresaw the John Pierre Paul stuff, blowing fingers off of their hands. So I'm more than happy, even at this age, to not be anywhere near that stuff. I have never set off a firework in my life, and I have absolutely no interest in doing it. And my kids are the same way.
Yeah, and I guess where Jason lives at all, I only know because I used to live around there, but Weird New Jersey has tons of like stories that are all based on like old like stories and kids tell each other, and like some of the road, like Igo Road and stuff like that, and the Satanists on there, and and stuff, and how well it is true that it backs up to the Marlboro Mental Institution. But I mean, if you travel in the opposite direction, it is a different experience, but it's all self-produced. But it's these tales that go on that drive you into like either venturing down it or telling more stories that you've not experienced. And also Jaws, the whole other thing about the Jaws being from your area, and yeah, because that just came up in the Weird New Jersey thing again about that painting that's over there on the reservoir wall in Aberdeen.
Right. I recently the graves of the people were discussed, and the whole thing was discussed because not longer ago than we think, about 6 or 7 years ago was the 100th anniversary of that. Yeah, for Chad's kind of looking around. Jaws is based on an incident that on a weeks-long incident that happened in New Jersey.
Okay.
Including there was a scene that came up a shark came up the Matawan Creek, which is about 10 minutes from here, and killed, I think 3 people were killed in the creek. One was killed in Beach Haven and one was killed in Spring Lake, actually, like,
Oh, right.
About 250 feet from where I used to surf, ironically. Except they later confirmed they caught a great white, a small great white, either in the Hudson or off of Long Island. But they're convinced it was a pretty significantly sized bull shark that did everything. It was not a great white.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the incident is something based off of goings on in New Jersey. And I actually drove down Igo Road not too long ago. It's completely different than it was when we were.
Oh,
You
really?
wouldn't believe what Yeah, if you come down, go that way. But my thought is, don't do it in the dark, and it's not because of anything that's going to happen. It's still technically largely dirt.
Yeah,
It's dirt and rock. You're going, if it's wet, you're gonna have, and there's a hell of a lot of potholes. So you're gonna want to navigate it in daylight. But yeah, I've been down it. It's pretty. There's a ton of new construction back there.
wow.
Houses that are like, they're unbelievable back there. Probably $1 million homes right there, pretty much.
Wow.
Yeah. Like I definitely would go down Igo Road if I was you, just to go search around. A ton of brand new developments over there. I mean, they've raised all of, except I think maybe 2 buildings of the old institute. They're all gone. It's all gone. There's also a rehab place for alcohol and drugs, right? Discovery and New Hope are there. Pretty much on or right adjacent to the grounds of the institute. The grounds of the institute, like I said, it's basically just a field at this point.
Wow.
And there's also the Pottersfield Cemetery is still there, though. So yeah, and like I said, if you usually come down around 4th of July, it might be an interesting little side trip to go, and tell them what the institute used to be like. That was a huge thing until it closed.
Yeah, I mean, Cedar Ridge, we went there with a class to Marlboro. Yeah, I remember that.
You wouldn't even recognize Cedar Ridge now.
Probably
Have
not.
you been there?
Nah, not.
You wouldn't
Not
recognize
in
it.
30 years.
Yeah, you wouldn't recognize it at all. You wouldn't recognize a lot. You've been through Old Bridge. There's a lot you probably don't recognize. Wait till you go down 9 when you see all the. I mean, you've been down it.
Yeah.
Now that it's a dirt field right now, which is one of the biggest mistakes they'll ever make, because when you take down trees and put dirt, guess what happens when you're driving down Route 9 in a bad wind?
Fix it all up.
Dust
Sure.
storms. You get dust storms on Route 9 now. That's a very, very wonderful thing.
How often do you drive through Old Bridge and say to the girls, there used to be this, there used to be that. Let me tell you about this. Let me tell you about that. I used to do that with my boys. I'd take them through Homedale. I'd show them the house. And then I learned pretty quickly that they didn't care. They just didn't care.
I went through your old Tom.
It's so funny you say that. It's so funny you say that, because when we were coming back from Columbia, we got detained well, not detained, but we had bad weather, so we had to spend a day in Miami. So we're in Miami, and like if we just meet people and stuff like that, just like me telling the girls, oh, when I lived here 30 years ago, the beach was like this, and I remember when this restaurant was owned by this guy. But man, and the people we met, the girls would listen to me, just kind of entertain me just to listen. But when I was like, if we met somebody, I was like, oh yeah, well, I remember when South Beach was just from 5th Street to 12th Street, not from 1st Street to 17th or whatever it was. And they just like look at me like, I wish this old man would just shut up. Like there was zero interest. I'm like, I just need to quit telling my stories. But for me, it's like this great big thing. Like, oh, it's changed so much. You don't realize it, but nobody else cares.
Yep. And my boys never really said that, but I definitely got the impression that there was just no interest. It might be changing now. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being optimistic. I think I go back to visit places like that and take the boys with me because I want to visit them, not because they do.
Yeah.
I went through
Exactly.
your old stomping grounds yesterday, Keith. I had to take Sadie over to a birthday party at the Chuck E. Cheese on 35 over there in Middletown. So
I'm not sure where it is, because it certainly wasn't there when I was growing up, obviously. Where is the Chuck E. Cheese? I mean, I know Middletown, I know 35. I couldn't possibly tell you where it is though.
There's a Bottle King over there. There's a couple of different things over there. I'll show you exactly where later. Can't remember exactly where it is, but It's before the Target on 35 there.
All of these things
And all
weren't there the last time I lived there. That's what I'm getting at. None of Bottle King didn't even exist. Target didn't exist when I lived in Homedale. They literally weren't even in business at that point. And Chuck E. Cheese didn't exist when I lived in Homedale. That's how long I've been gone.
At one point I was pretty close to Crawford's Corner Road, so
That's much more closer to where I lived.
not very far from Bellworks,
Mhm.
which I was like actually was trying to push to go to dinner there last night, but that didn't happen. There's a really good barbecue place in Bellworks now.
Yeah,
Really?
maybe you and I can do that instead of you.
I think we
Glenn.
might have to, yeah. But I digress. We, as our shows usually revolve around food or something like that, somewhere along the way. I can bring up one that my father never told me, but maybe I shouldn't be bringing this up, but anybody remember all the misconceptions about
Oh, please go right down that alley.
anybody remember that? I mean, we could probably go on for days about those.
The
The
reason
one I really
can't
remember is
I can't contribute on that subject because
Blind
my
or
parents never
the Harry
talked to me.
Potter? Which one?
My parents never talked to me about any of that subject at all. They didn't need to.
There's a fucking surprise.
They didn't need to. I had 3 older brothers. So I kind of knew the entire story by the time I was 6. I have such a vivid memory, not to go too far down this road, but I have such a vivid memory of the whole family going to the Museum of Natural History. I think that's what it was in New York City. I'm 6 years old, and we're sort of not really walking with our parents. Our parents are doing their thing, and the 4 brothers are sticking together and doing theirs. And we get to an exhibit where there's a image of a man and a woman who are both naked, but it's more of a muscular skeletal thing. And it points out different parts of the human body and all that. And my brothers gave me quite the tutorial on the female anatomy. They were pretty vivid and pretty direct about their views on that. That was my initial lessons on all of that sort of thing. And from there, anything that had to do with bodily function or anything like that, I learned from my brothers. So my parents were I never had a conversation with my parents about any of that stuff. Not sure where my oldest brother got all of his information from, but yeah, they were my teachers.
I would say his friends, but I mean, you've told stories about him, so I don't know, how many he actually had. But
I was gonna say none of us had really had a whole lot of friends. I mean, maybe I should ask Joel if he ever had the conversation with my parents. I'll have to go and ask him that. I mean, you're talking that would have been something that would be about 65 years ago, 65 years ago. He probably doesn't remember.
So I'd say my mom and dad were divorced, but my mom didn't say much. I asked her about it, and she kind of gave me some. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what that means. So that's how she handled it. But then my uncle, I may have told this story before, but my uncle and my dad at the time had a farm. So my uncle goes into scientific detail about spermatozoa swimming up the fallopian tube, and it would have been a great. But there's, like we talked about, like age appropriate, like it was kind of above our heads a little bit at that time. Like I understand it now, but at that time it was a little too detailed, I think, and too much, too many topics covered at that time.
Was it too detailed, or was it a very smart strategy to blow your brains enough to say, oh, it's too smart for me, I don't want to deal with that, and have you just back away for a while?
Yeah, I don't know. I think because he went through the whole deal. I mean, I remember he went from A to Z in the whole deal. So I think it was a legit on his part to tell us.
And how old were you
But
at
he
the
just
time?
I don't know, we were probably 7 or 8.
I mean, we all know that Chad was the child prodigy, but that's still kind of intense. You know what I mean?
It was intense, but you know, he was a farm, but he was a pre-med, and his dad was a doctor, my uncle. And then but he dropped out of med school and became a farmer. So he's super bright guy. And but just on that, it was just like too detailed. But good for him. He took a shot because at that time, you know, when we think back to that time, it just wasn't that well thought out. I don't think many people had those discussions. Not with
On the other hand, it
boys
stuck
anyway.
with you. On the other hand, it stuck with you and you do remember it, even if you didn't
It did.
understand it then. So,
It did. Absolutely.
and then you would go on and make it even more detailed for Frankie. I am absolutely sure of that.
but I meted it out in smaller pieces at age appropriate times. But I still got oh, Dad, do we have to talk about this? I'm like, hey, let's just take 3 minutes.
The funny
So,
thing is I have really had very little conversation with my sons about that stuff. You know, they, had their circles of friends and they talked about that stuff a lot at school, and a lot of the school itself provided a lot of the education fairly early. And I will say that there's definitely evidence around the house that they've been very careful about how they interact with their respective ladies, and they do all the right things and all that. It's a little bit too much evidence around the house, but we're not going to go there. They clearly know their stuff. So, and I'm not a grandfather, so things must have be progressing pretty well.
yeah.
God help us all.
Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. I shouldn't have been allowed to reproduce to begin with. What are you talking about?
Anybody have anything they want to add before we wrap this up?
Final thought, because I said so. I'm done.
Yeah, but I use that line all the time.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me because as we're talking about some of the stuff, some of the things ring true, some of them don't. But we have to figure out which ones do. The measure twice, cut once. That's a good one. You'll get a cold from going outside, not so good. So, but it's hard to distinguish the good from the bad. But it's all in there. But somehow we've all made it to here. So good for us.
And every wives' tale or expression was intended to exert control in some sense. They were trying to get us to follow a certain level of behavior by saying it. Question is, how many of them did we wind up using ourselves?
Yep.
Yeah, I never subscribed to the get a cold in the rain shit. I didn't do that. But a certain other parent in this family unit did, so whatever.
So I remember a little thing that somebody was, don't like your meatloaf. That was always one thing that little quip that a couple people in my family used to use. We could probably all go on for days about them as we sat here longer and just came up with them, because they probably just would pop in our head out of the blue usually. And I'm sure we most likely will hear one and come up with our own that we use on our own kids or have used on our own kids. Yes, it's all part of parenting. So,
and I thought it was just duct tape. I don't understand. I'm so confused.
So from all of us here at Dad's on Life, take care, everybody. And Keith, eat my shorts.
My traditional weekly greeting. I'm so happy. Have a wonderful week.